This is eCoffee with Experts, where marketers and founders share what's actually working in SEO, AI, and digital growth. Grab your coffee and fuel your mind as we chat with top minds about their wins, struggles, and lessons you won't find in a blog post. Brought to you by Digital Web Solutions, we bring real talk to help you grow your business, one episode at a time. Let's get started.
Anything you can think of that's health related can be related to emotions and your nervous system and the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. At Troscriptions, for the audience, explain what the concept of Troscriptions is.
Yeah, let's pan out just a second here because I think we're going to build this from like mission vision and then we'll come into the company. So if you go to the backdrop for Troscriptions, and really the backdrop starts with our nonprofit, Health Optimization Medicine and Practice, or you can shorten it to Health Optimization Medicine. What we're really trying to do there is shift perspective from disease to health. And what I mean by that is that you can look around in the United States, 66% of the people are overweight. I'm hoping that gets updated with all the GLP-1s out there right now. And then a decent chunk of them, probably close to 50% now, are obese. So that, if you overlay that data with the fact that the average American now spends between $13,000 and $15,000 on healthcare, we're not succeeding. And that's the highest in the world, by the way. The closest after that is Switzerland, and then it precipitously drops from there, right? There is a ton of innovation in this country, but the end results speak for themselves, right? So why is that? Well, many of us don't really care about our health until we have a diagnosis. Even myself, when I was going through my own health journey, I was actually kind of like the cover, like I was kind of like the poster child for what health is, but then kind of later discovered I missed a few things, right? And so if you have most of the people in this world that don't really deal with health until they have a diagnosis or they get older and they want to be able to pick up their grandkids, our mission is really to kind of shift that perspective. And to really, if we succeed with that nonprofit, is to introduce something called a health manager into the healthcare system. So who do you go to if you have issues with focus, stress, et cetera? The thing with our nonprofit is we teach people really nutrient and hormone balancing along with 7 different foundational modules. Nutrient and hormone balancing in the most disciplined clients takes about 6 to 9 months. And so if I were to tell you as your practitioner today, hey, your focus issue, it's going to resolve itself, but it's going to take 6 to 9 months. You're going to fire me and probably go find somebody that's going to write you a prescription for Adderall, right? But we wanted to solve that problem with Troscriptions. And so Troscriptions is really that point in time solution for your focus issues, your sleep issues, your stress issues, et cetera, while you work with your practitioner over the long term to balance your nutrients and hormones. This isn't always the best pitch for a VC, but I always say to them, my intention is never to give you Troscriptions for your entire life. My intention is for you to use Troscriptions as a catalyst to continue your health journey in a successful way. And so Troscriptions, what we do is we solve common issues that comes through a practitioner's door. These include focus, sleep, stress. Stress is actually one of the kind of keystone factors that we find people are dealing with these days. Immune system function. We'll have products for pain and sexual dysfunction soon. But Troscriptions, we always say novel ingredients, right? We're going to use ingredients that most people have never heard of. We're going to educate the hell out of you on those ingredients because they're really effective. You're going to take it. And one of the things that I'm most proud of what we've done is that if you watch Troscriptions content, whether it's our podcast, the Health Optimization Medicine podcast, or our YouTube channel, you'd have an end-to-end education on health optimization without even paying us a dime. And that's all for free. But Troscriptions, what we're here to do is to really solve those common issues that come through a practitioner's door.
That makes a lot of sense. And you're right. We don't focus on health until it's too late. And I think there's a lot of companies that I see too. It goes with everything in business, not just personal. It's the adage, how you do one thing is how you do everything. And so things are changing so fast in the business and the marketing landscape. We're going to talk about AI today. We're going to talk about Google algorithm updates, how it's impacted the company and what we're doing to respond to that. But I'm curious, when you started the company and you're setting the vision, you're looking to wherever the company is going to go, like you mentioned, there are other products and other things that you are solving for. When you originally got into that, did you have a, let's say, like a marketing plan or like a very, did you know how you were going to bring this to the market?
So this is funny, right? So I'm going to take you guys back to late 2019, early 2020. So we launched our first product on February 20th, 2020. I'll give you a hint of what came a month later, right? So the world shuts down. But, Troscriptions is a bootstrap company. We've never raised outside capital and for the foreseeable future don't intend to. And as a result of that, you have to get clever. The thing about Dr. Ted Scott and myself is that we know a lot of people in this broad world that used to be called biohacking. It still exists, but we know, who the top influencers are. And all these people are some people that we have in text message and can call friends, right? And so if you look at Troscriptions, let's take you back into that 2019 slot. What we did really well initially was building a hype machine. And
Mm,
so in 2019, we knew the biohacker audience was where we were going to go because they're early adopters. And I mentioned to you earlier that we have novel ingredients.
mhm,
The thing about that community is they're always willing to embrace the novel. And so if you remember the book Crossing the Chasm, our beachhead, if you will, or actually our initial market was really somebody who's an early adopter, super early adopter. I forget the technical term that they had in that book, but we went and built the hype machine by going to conferences and handing these out.
mm,
Here's the cool thing about our first product. It dyes your tongue blue.
mm,
Now, when people were taking it, they were also sharing it on social media because a lot of these people are self-proclaimed influencers, right?
mhm.
They share it on social media. Social media, eventually they'd come back to us, sign up for an email list. So when we launched the product, we already had an email list of like 20,000 people, right? And in 2020, that launch also came with kind of tapping on your friends and saying like, "Hey, can you help me launch this?" The cool thing about those guys is that when they knew we were bootstrapped, they knew that we couldn't pay them. And so, first podcast was free, right? And so that really, really helped get the ground rolling. And we got lucky along the way. But, it so happens that one of the ingredients was very useful for that particular issue that we went through, the world shutdown. And, as a result of that, the company grew and was free cash flow positive within a couple months of growth. Or a couple months of launching. So the initial target market, we were very, very honed in on this group because we had a network of people that can help us. And so influencer marketing podcasts were huge channels for us and still are huge channels for us to this day.
Mm. You're talking about influencer marketing, but one of the other things that I really like about the approach is the educational aspect. You mentioned the first of all the newsletter or the YouTube video or the podcast. There was a presenter at SEO Week in New York a couple weeks ago, and his presentation was called "Teach the Shit Out of Everything,"
Yep.
and that was the concept. Because these are, if you're educating, the whole purpose of that is to bring new information into the world and deliver it with a unique perspective. And I think one would assume that that would help with SEO results, that would help with all sorts of net new content, which is what Google is looking for. And we can anticipate if the Google AI overviews in Gemini kind of, not citing, they're just taking generalized, aggregated content. I would imagine that if you're bringing new information to the world, introducing novel ingredients, that's got to be a benefit for being found or getting found.
So you bring up a good point. And this didn't occur. Well, what occurred immediately was the newsletter. We were sending out the once a week newsletter. Here's a recap, that kind of stuff. The newsletter hasn't stopped since, and it comes out with more frequency. We knew very early on that we were great educators. It's myself and four doctors that started the company. Two of those MDs are still involved in the day to day. And so you have in that, like I have sort of a golden bird or token or whatever you want to call it,
Yeah, yeah.
that I have a golden goose in my back pocket, right? And so there's actually a Harvard paper, if you look up deep metaphors, right? Deep metaphors, there's 6 or 8 of them. And the two that really applied to transcriptions were transformation, which is essentially showing somebody's journey, and then resource. And
Mm,
resource, what we always strive to do is to be the go-to resource for all things health optimization. I met it earlier when I said it. You can buy nothing from us and watch all of our content, and you would have a soup to nuts education on health optimization. And if we're missing something, please email me because we will cover it. And that's the intention there. And so when you say educate the shit out of something, that is what we do well. That is our bread and butter. We are incredible educators. We're trying to get better at storytelling, but we are incredible educators at heart.
Mm. Yeah. So you're right. Like, I love the golden goose analogy because you have people, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but if someone is an MD, maybe they're still practicing, maybe they have an office, they're talking with patients. Obviously, the foreground or background, depending on how involved they are, is going to be Troscriptions. How do you Okay, let me back up a little bit. A lot of what good marketers do is they make a hypothesis or they listen to their audience first and then they create hypotheses and then they test the hypotheses. And then the education piece is reporting the results, which likely will result in new information. Since we're talking about a form of healthcare, how do you get this enough good information from clients while being aware that there are some sort of regulations, maybe HIPAA's involved. I don't know how deep that goes, but you have to be careful about how you extract information, right?
Yeah, of course. HIPAA not so much involved in a dietary supplements business, but let's talk about that. So, Dr. Ted, Dr. Scott, two co-founders, and myself, they still see patients on an everyday basis. I myself have a health consulting business as a health optimization practitioner. I see patients every month, or clients. My that business is very small for me because this is the primary thing that I do. But why do I keep that? Is because I want to be able to talk to the practitioner, one of our core marketing avatars, and be able to speak their language, right? And so that allows me to keep up on things like peptides or hormones or whatever. And I have a pretty rigorous education in those fields. But so why do one of the things that you mentioned earlier is about hypothesis testing. So when we initially launched the product, it was a focus product, and we all know that the world has a somewhat of a focus issue. The average American/human has the attention of a goldfish now. Thank you, social media.
Mm.
And so we can do hypothesis testing in different forms. When we launched the company in February 2020, we had a hypothesis, right? That this very niche market, largely labeled biohacking at the time, now probably expanded into the field of longevity. These are your early adopters, and that they will love this because it's a lot of new ingredients and it freaking works very quickly. You have what's called a sensorial cue. And so you'll feel it work. And then also the fact that it had a blue tongue at that time, everybody wanted to share a story on social media. That hypothesis was like, okay, if Americans in particular like stimulants, this is a good one. Let's see what happens. Then what actually happened is we got the virality from people sharing it on social media. We also got the sort of referrals from the podcasters that I mentioned. And then that allowed us to have like an ecosystem or an N of several thousand people who would then all provide feedback. What did that feedback look like? Feedback looked like, well, can you remove caffeine from the product? Can you remove CBD from the product? Can you remove this other ingredient from the product? That actually led us to creating what is now our best-selling product called Just Blue, which is pure methylene blue, right? And so the hypothesis testing, what we initially came through as like a self-generated hypothesis and then came back, all this feedback led to product development, but it also led to different messages, right? And so when we talk about blue carnitine, we use the phrase brain fog a lot, right? Because a lot of people will come to us and say, hey, I had brain fog before, but now it's gone, right? That resonates with a lot of people because a lot of Americans struggle getting out of bed every day. A lot of people kind of schlep through their morning saying, why does it feel like I have a heavy head? Well, here's a solution for that, right? And so we're constantly hypothesis testing, but the hypothesis testing leads to things like product development, key marketing messages. Those iterate too, meaning that we're never going to rest our laurels on here's the marketing message for everybody. Even now, as I kind of look at expanding our audiences, we're starting to see a number of older consumers, particularly women, that are very interested in our sleep product. Okay, that's interesting. And I'm getting these testimonials sort of unsolicited.
Yeah.
And now it's like, okay, why don't we go check that market? What do we need to do there? What they're sending us basically the language we need to use to talk to them.
Hey, we hope you're enjoying the copy and the conversation so far. This show is powered by Digital Web Solutions, and if you've ever wondered how the biggest brands actually build authority, this is it. DWS has a massive network of over 250,000 publishers, real sites that help you rank on Google, and more importantly, stay visible in AI search. It's the heavy lifting most teams just can't do on their own. As a thank you for listening, they're offering an exclusive free strategy call just for our eCoffee listeners. It's a great way to map out your authority plan for 2026. Just click the link below to book yours and see how they can help scale your brand. All right, now let's get back to the show. So in this process, you mentioned now there's a best-selling product, Just Blue, and that came from feedback, this iterative cycle where you get to listen to people. First of all, you have to have a statistically significant number. It's not just one or two people saying, can you remove the caffeine? Not a good business choice. But your role as the CEO is to project, see the future as much as you can, and then guide the company in a direction of the future that you want to create, which I think that's what a great CEO does. They cast the vision and bring people along and create a world for that person that fits inside of this larger vision.
Yeah.
Seems like you're doing that very well. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple things I would add to that, right? Because that was an example of when we took market feedback and generated a product. Really, after that, we started to look at large markets that don't really have a bull bear cycle. What I mean by that is in the health world, you can make a good business model by following the ingredient of the day, right? Last year, we saw this with methylene blue. We had 70% of the traffic on methylene blue at the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, it was way less than that, right? It had this hype phase and it's sort of like an S curve, right? And you see this across technologies, whatever in health. But you have a hype phase and then it goes down. And then you have this sort of core buyer base, which right now is practitioners for us, that kind of carries you through. But there's certain markets where people are always going to have the issue. Remember what I said about that common issues that come through a practitioner's door? That was, call it a new vision for the product line that emerged right around the time we introduced TroCalm. So TroCalm is our product for stress. If you think about stress or anxiety, I tend to use the word stress more because anxiety is technically a medical term. The world suffers from a hell of a lot of stress. You mentioned when we were talking about breathwork, and breathwork 10 years ago was such a foreign concept to people. But now if I tell somebody I'm going to do breath work, it's like, okay, count me in, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's different type of breath work that you can largely use to regulate your nervous system. What is breath work a signal of? This growth in breath work classes, what is it a signal of? It's a signal of people wanting to address their nervous system, parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system. How do we address that? Well, Dr. Ted's background is in pharmacology and toxicology. So what we did was is we actually looked at these larger sandboxes, stress being the first, sleep being a much larger one. And then we'll look at other ones in the future and saying like, hey, how can we address this from a supplement perspective in the best way possible by helping your neurotransmitters along on the journey so that it complements your breath work. It complements those behavior changes that you're making to put you on that path to health optimization. So again, it's a different hypothesis that, hey, we want to enter these much larger sandboxes, but how do we do it in a novel way? And then when we're in those sandboxes, how do we expand the size of the sandbox? So if you think about kind of the future, Troscriptions could very much end up like we have teams that are running with sleep, right? And we have teams that are running with stress. And their whole goal is to expand the size of their sandbox. That's really what pharmaceutical companies do. But for us right now, it's really about let's enter those sandboxes and then we'll figure out how to grow them as we go.
I would imagine that we're talking about kind of like a macro, I don't know, let's call it awakening, where people are opening their minds and they're saying, oh, maybe it's not healthy for me to have this like big kit of pills that I take every day. And I don't feel normal until after I take them or after I have all these things.
If they know what
I
normal is at all. Right?
Yeah. like what even, and so you're getting people who are awakening to other forms of, yeah, things that help them, I suppose. How much of the business, and then you talked earlier about education in, when we're talking about marketing, a lot of what small to mid-sized businesses are talking about is demand generation. We want people to reach out to us to make our phones ring, and therefore our customer acquisition cost lowers because we don't have to spend as much, educating or trying to push the product. How do you see that sort of demand generation? Is that through just education? What other forms or mediums or strategies are you using for that?
Yeah, so there's this great book by Gabriel Weinberg called Traction, and I think it's sort of the Bible for this type of thing. And I remember reading it before we even had Troscriptions and being like, well, this is good. I'm just going to take a copy of it, keep it on my desk. And, when I start a company, I'm going to have a project in each one of these. And in some ways, when you're starting a business and going from 0 to 1, what I found a good approach is to have a project in each one of those. And you know that some of them won't work, right? And then you double on down on the ones that do. So when we talk about demand generation, I think of traction. And so what are our core avenues of traction, really? What's funny is like paid media actually only became a thing for us mid last year. We didn't really touch paid acquisition for a while. So our initial traction sources I mentioned, right? So podcasts and influencer marketing. Again, I'm going to leverage my golden goose in the back pocket. I have two MDs who are incredible educators. I myself am happy to go on podcasts and talk about people's entrepreneurial journey. And that's been a very, very successful channel for traction for us. So podcast marketing is probably our largest channel. Then we kind of look at influencer marketing. So there's some people where the way we look at influencers is we want to hire educators. I don't want to hire just anybody who has a million followers. I want to hire somebody who's going to have an audience that's going to be interested in the phrase mechanism of action, just giving an example. And so that's a huge marketing channel for us. Then because we bootstrapped this and because perhaps we got a little lucky along the way, we decided to look at organic. Now, organic evolved over the years. I mentioned earlier that we started a newsletter right away, and we've had that
Mhm.
newsletter ever since. Newsletter eventually evolved into, I'm trying to remember what came first. Like newsletter, Instagram. We were very good at Instagram early on because of
Mm.
that virality of the blue tongue. But what later came and what now is kind of the core of the business is organic YouTube, right?
Mhm.
So we produce one long form video every single week, several shorts, and that's been huge in terms of traffic generation. In fact, we have ways of tracking this: post purchase survey, Google Analytics, whatever you want to call. It's our top source is our Troscriptions YouTube, followed
Mm.
by our own podcast. So you're hosting this podcast on behalf of your business, right? We do the same thing. It's the Health Optimization Medicine podcast. It's the number one life sciences podcast in the United States, which is the largest podcast market in the world. That provides a substantial amount of traffic for both our nonprofit and our for-profit Troscriptions. Then we start to that like kind of carried us through mid last year. And then, we've had a lot of stops and starts with paid. The thing about our product is it's not something that you're going to buy on a first glance, right? It's not the
Mm.
impulse buy that I'm going to get on an ad. There's a lot of businesses that work really well for that, right? We just heard about one, Grun's, $1 billion exit, right?
Mm.
It's something that people get. They get it on the first try. It's a gummy. It's an easy thing to understand. I chew it, I swallow it, done. We have an interesting delivery mechanism that not everybody realizes they should swallow. And then we have interesting ingredients, all which need further explanation.
Mm.
But we added paid because we come to find that the number of touch points that somebody needs to have with the Troscriptions brand is significant. So paid is not even, it's probably like 15% of our traffic, right? And that includes Google, Meta. Both of those platforms are problematic for health companies. We can get into that if you want. And we've experienced all of those. But, there is also significant investment in SEO. We're now investing in GEO or AI SEO, whatever the hell you want to call it these days. So all of those things kind of make up the demand generation that is Troscriptions.
Mm. There's a Yeah, like you said, a significant investment in the organic side, let's call it SEO, which does, if you are hosting podcasts and you're writing blogs and you have a newsletter, like even now LinkedIn is being indexed. So, growing a personal brand is going to help with visibility. And typically, people are, I would imagine, looking for the keywords that they're looking for are their symptoms. They're like, I'm stressed. I need some help with this. I can't sleep. It's 3 in the morning. They're probably looking for their symptoms and not the solution. Right. And
Yeah.
that's where the
Yeah.
education piece comes up.
So it's exactly right. And so, especially with AI SEO, it's usually symptoms first. How do I deal with this kind of thing?
Yeah.
But when we talk about just so the easier way for me to monitor that would be like, what keywords do we buy?
Hmm.
We're typically buying keywords on the issue the person is facing, what we just discussed and described as symptoms. And we're typically more on the long tail keywords because direct ones are super expensive.
Hmm.
And then we're also looking at the ingredients that we have because there's some times where somebody may hear us on a podcast. They might hear us from Tom DeLauer's show, and Tom has like 6 million followers on YouTube, right? And they might then throw it into Google, and then we want to show them a Troscriptions ad, right? It's that continuity of experience, because he heard about us on Thomas's show, and then they go ahead and see, hey, this is actually showing up. Okay, let me check it out a little bit more. For us, it's not a impulse buy. And so we have to keep that in mind every time we market something. So we have to show up in every form that everybody is looking at. Like we're looking at AppLovin now too. We haven't been super successful with it because again, that's like a colder audience for us. But it helps with there's sort of a halo effect, and we can monitor that through various toggling on and off of certain states and everything. All of it kind of goes to taking that person on that journey, but the core of what we do is education.
Perfect. I love what you said, the continuity of experience, where I I would imagine like
People
pixel
would call it
tracking or
retargeting, but I decided not to use that
yeah.
word.
Yeah, fancy way of saying it. It makes sense though. If you're going down that journey and then you see a brand that you've seen somewhere before or you heard somewhere before and you're not really sure where, it tends to give you another boost of trust. As we near the end of the conversation, I'm curious how all of this mindset wise, your experience, your POV of the world, how that translates into how you lead your team, the principles that you have for people who work with you, and are there any sort of habits or internal, what do you call those rituals? I suppose that you have.
Yeah. So, such a good question. And I think there's a couple of different ways I'm going to tackle this. When we think about the company, and we say this on the website, we say our mission is to democratize enlightenment. Enlightenment's a very heavy word, right? When people hear it, they usually turn their face. And so, if you're listening to this, just bear with me a moment. I'm going to unpack enlightenment for you. So, enlightenment is freedom from the illusion of the self, which means that you're kind of detached from your ego. If you take that into a literal situation, it's presence, meaning that I am present with you in this conversation. I'm not thinking about the next thing I have to do after this. I'm present with my employee. I'm present with our team in the meeting. Nobody's got anything else open. It's just us conversing right there. And one of the ways, the vector by which we chose to address enlightenment and remove those obstacles in the way to presence is looking at health, right? Because if you're in pain, you're probably thinking about your pain while you're having the conversation. If you are not able to sleep, you're probably thinking about how tired you are when you're having the conversation, right? And that's something that we try to help our team with, but also it's something we lead with both internal and external, right? Then when we talk about just sort of habits of the team, I mentioned one. So if you're in a meeting, there's nothing else you're doing. If one of the things we like to start with the week with in our weekly meetings is it's supposed to be a short answer question, and it's just a random question to get to know each other. One of that aspect reflects a lot of our core values. So we have 5 core values: curiosity, agility, non-reciprocal altruism, so giving without expecting receipt, conscientiousness, and which the one I'm forgetting right now, curiosity, communication, of course.
Mm, yeah,
And
nice.
so we live, we die by those 5 core values. It also ties into the Ocean Big 5 personality test. So the habits come from that presence. It also encourages a presence with work. All of our employees have access to our curriculum. at health optimization medicine practice. So they can go through the course or the 7 foundational courses, become a certified practitioner. What that allows them to do is not only address their own health, but the health of the people that are closest to them. If they choose to become a practitioner, we'll assist them in doing so. But we also give them access to our products because if we believe that removing the health obstacle is a key tool to presence, why not? And then, it also inspires conversations about how you reflect in your communities with your loved ones, etc. And so outside of work, can you be more present in those conversations? And if you think about it, what does it produce? A less reactionary environment, a more thoughtful environment, a more curious environment, better communication. I could tick down all of our values, conscientiousness, etc. And in a world where AI is now the topic du jour and probably will be for the foreseeable future, both curiosity and agility mean so much.
It sounds like those were expanded upon from your own personal values because I can definitely see, especially as a CEO and co-founder, the the ethos of the company typically, it stems from what the core beliefs of the founder are. Obviously, that's why the company would exist in the first place. So I would imagine, were those your kind of core operating principles for your own personal life that got expanded into the company?
So Dr. Ted, Dr. Scott, and myself started the company. And, you know, I don't want to speak for them, but I always tell people that the company is a reflection of me, right? In the sense that we talked about personal branding a bit earlier. I could not give a shit about personal brands. I know it's needed. And so I post, I do the things, but it's not my favorite thing to do in the world. Let's put it that way.
Hmm.
If you want to get to know me, go talk to the companies. And that's really a reflection of me. And so, yes, to answer your question, those do come through in terms of core values. There's some that are probably weighted a little bit more than others in various different moments. But like my whole life has been just a curious journey. One of my favorite people in history is Leonardo da Vinci. And if you actually take da Vinci in his lifetime, he was guided by curiosity. He was a guy who studied everything from helicopters to anatomy to art. He was by no means successful. I'm hoping that, him being a role model for me is not the path that
Yeah.
I take. In his lifetime, he had a lot of failures. He had a lot of failed projects, things he just didn't answer.
Hmm.
And by the end of it, he seemed to be quite a miser, quite miserable. But that curiosity is kind of how I guide my life. Communication, when you're working with a team that we have some team around the United States, we have some team in the Philippines. When I hire people, the first thing I look for is communication. Very close second is curiosity. And, the third, we evaluate everybody by those 5 core values. And if they don't, or if they aren't up to snuff on any of them, we don't even think about it. But agility in this age is so important. So can you learn quickly? Are you curious about what's coming next? Are you anticipating that? Well, you need to be. And that's just how we operate.
Man, I could have this core values conversation for another, several hours. In fact,
You tell me when. I'm happy
I
to. I'm always happy to.
exactly. I was going to say, in fact, I do have these conversations with everybody who will listen and not shy away and be like, can we just talk about the game or whatever? World Cup
I'm
is
happy to
going
talk
on,
about
man.
I'm happy to talk about the game, but my game is really talking like I'll talk about the game for 5-10 minutes because I feel like you have to, especially in the United States, talk about sports.
Yeah.
But if you really want to get down to what's interesting to me, it's like building companies, making an impact, somewhat of activism, those kind of things.
Mm, mhm. And that's what I mean, speaking of longevity, if we're talking about a company, right? It just depends. It all traces back to motivation. Motivation's broken into the absence of loss, or I guess whatever that term is, right? The absence of loss or the prospect of gain. And it seems like there's both of these forces at play here. You have the prospect of gain, which is a more present, a more conscious, communicative society, and then also a society that is healthier with the absence of disease. So both of those.
And if you the net effect of that is if you look at healthcare bankruptcies in the United States, it's ridiculous. Like healthcare
Mhm.
causes more bankruptcies here than anywhere in the world. In fact, it's probably one of the only places that has so many. So the net effect of that is actually bringing down healthcare costs and healthcare bankruptcies. You said something else that was interesting that I wanted to piggyback on, but I just kind of forget it at the moment.
Man, what a great conversation. As we close, is there, a lot of people I think are realizing like, man, AI is so accessible. Big companies are folding left and right just because they can't keep up. They're not agile. If someone is looking to start their own project, start their own business, launch something, even though we're not in a global pandemic or anything like that right now, we are in a way, but we'll always be in a sort of a panic depending on where, how you look
Yeah.
at it. What sort of feedback or advice or parting words or starting words would you give to someone who's looking to start their own venture?
So first thing I want to, it actually came to mind something that you said on your previous statement that so people oftentimes when it comes to motivation, they have loss aversion or they're motivated to succeed. And there's one thing that Kobe Bryant actually said that has always stuck with me. And it's great if you're loss adverse, you're constantly going to be thinking about losing things, and oftentimes you'll manifest that loss. If you're constantly thinking about the future and winning, you're constantly living in the future. And so what Kobe said is, I'm neither. I'm here to learn. And so his whole thing was, even when he's in the NBA finals, was just, I want that feedback loop to get better. And what happened to Kobe? He's one of the best, probably top 5 best players in the NBA history. I
Yeah.
don't, I'm not a huge NBA fan. Somebody might shoot me in the comments for saying that. But, he's somebody that him, and then there's been a few books about the idea of being equanimous. And so you don't chase highs and you certainly don't avoid lows. You just kind of stick with what is, knowing that there's an evanescent nature to everything and that it will pass. And oftentimes by focusing on it, hyper focusing on it, it's what makes it pass slower. But anyway, let's bring it back to your question about somebody who's starting a project now. What kind of advice? Like, look, you honed in on artificial intelligence, and I think this is the technology for my generation, for your generation, for generations to come, right? And so that's a great place to start living, learning everything about AI. The cool thing is you don't really need to know. It helps to know how to code, but you don't really need to know how to code. You can also ask it to teach you. And so you have an index of all of the world's knowledge available to you at your fingertips. And so if I'm thinking about a project, what would I do? And I'm constantly looking at projects. We have 5 different companies, right? Start is my first piece of advice. Like, absolutely start. So many people, like, the death of all great ideas is intellectual masturbation. And so just sitting there and saying, I can't do this, I can't do this. Like, my goal is that if I'm sitting on my deathbed, I don't want to have any regret, right? And Bezos had the regret minimization framework. There's a book about it. Totally get it, believe it, etc. So start and iterate as fast as possible. And just know that speed is your friend. And when you're small, it's a huge advantage. When you get even to the size that we are now and have 15 people, you have a lot of stuff you have to tackle. But if you're tackling something with 1, 2, or 3 people, you can iterate so fast. And the cool thing is that now you can stay quite small and still build a very large idea if you understand these technologies. So I'll leave people with that. It's just start.
Yeah. I love it. And yeah, you can't get to the iteration process. You can't pick up momentum and gain that speed unless you do have a starting point. Man,
It's like
Boomer.
you said
Yeah.
earlier, it's like a hypothesis testing. You're constantly just testing your hypothesis and iterating on it, right? And you can get feedback so fast now. And so, like, to anybody starting, it's such an exciting time to be an entrepreneur because, yeah, you have now a baseline that's very high for quality of product that's going to be accepted by an audience, but you're able to get that feedback and grow quite fast. And there's likely a number of people that will want to join hands with you if you got something good going.
Yeah. Where do you want the audience to reach out to you? Do you prefer LinkedIn? Do you prefer somewhere else? Where can we engage?
Sure. So first, I meant what I said earlier. The companies are kind of a reflection of me. And so Troscriptions.com, homehope.org, Troscriptions and Home Hope are how you find those companies on social media. If you want to engage with me directly, The place that I'm most active is LinkedIn. You can also find me on so LinkedIn's Boomer Anderson, and then if you mention this show, I'll be sure to respond to the message because I get a lot of spam there. And then the other thing is Instagram at Boomer SNH. I occasionally post there, but at least you'll see a lot of the stuff that our companies are doing.
Yeah, very cool. And you're, by the way, a great guest to have. It was a pleasure to host you. I know you've had a lot of practice and there's a lot of your man. That's what I wish more people would do. Sometimes I'll host folks and it's their first podcast. And I'm like, you probably don't realize how much you know and how valuable you can be to the world until you put yourself in situations like this. So it's been a pleasure.
Well, Austin, it's been amazing getting to know you both pre and post recording or pre and during recording. We might actually host our conference next year in Phoenix, and I'd love to have you there.
So cool, man. I am totally there. I'll walk around with a blue tongue and go live on Facebook. Don't even
Awesome.
stress.
Awesome.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Take care.